Good evening, everybody. It's Steve with Real Progressives. This is a very, very special night for me. For those of you who have followed me for some time, you know that I like to provide sources for every word that I say. My goal is not to puff up, is not to do anything that brings attention to myself. My goal is to bring attention to macroeconomic reality. Some of the people that I put forward, you've probably never heard of. Some of them you have. Others are just coming onto your radar. One of the people that is in the list of links that I always provide, especially the one for money growth does not cause inflation, is TCU professor and economist and all-around good guy progressive, John Harvey. John, let me bring you onto the screen here, sir.
Welcome. Hi, how you doing?
I'm doing well.
Sir.
So,
thanks for having
John,
me.
Thank you, man. Thank you for coming.
Sure. Yeah.
So do me a favor for our audience. I'm trying to expose them to as many voices outside of the orthodoxy within that new Keynesian, beyond the new Keynes, post-Keynesians, and the MMT crowd, of course. You're a little different. Talk to us a little bit about who you are, where you come from, and what your perspective is.
Right. Well, I was trained, like the vast majority of economists, as a neoclassical, which is the mainstream. And they're the ones, for example, that believe we have to balance the budget and so forth. And I was really depressed in graduate school, actually. I thought about quitting. I thought, this is it. I thought it was going to be a lot better than this. I thought that what we were going to do was, most people have taken some econ undergrad, and you have, assume this, assume that. I thought that grad school was going to be, let's take off these unrealistic assumptions, and now we'll tell you how it really works. And we didn't do that. We used the same assumptions, but now we used calculus instead of algebra. And if I hadn't have the fact that one day I walked into my office in grad school and saw this book on my desk called A Guide to Post-Keynesian Economics, and I asked whose it was, and nobody claimed it, so I did. And I started reading through it. It was like, oh my God, this is what I've been looking for this whole time. Okay, I'll put up with the stuff I have to put up with in grad school, get my PhD, and then I'm going to do the kind of research I want to do, which turns out to be something called post-Keynesian. And that's actually based on Keynes, because Keynesians and Keynes aren't the same thing, which is not worth taking up your time with tonight, but it's not the same thing. So this are people who thought, no, what Keynes said in the first place made a lot of sense, but nobody really listened. So that was my introduction. And I'll tell you, a big theme in post-Keynesian economics is real world, real world, real world. If you can't make this, no helicopters dropping money out. I mean, you wouldn't even begin to get an article published in the Journal of Post-Keynesian Economics if you had, like Milton Friedman did in his classic article, a helicopter flying over dropping money out. Obviously we make use analogies and so forth, but at any rate, so this really sort of got me excited about that. And then once I went to TCU, where I was very lucky in that a lot of universities, if you're not publishing in the mainstream, it doesn't count for anything. So that was not the case at TCU. So I could spend this early part of my career sort of learning about Keynes and post-Keynesian economics and so forth. And now that was 30 years ago. I got my PhD 30 years ago. To fast forward here, Facebook comes along, and we're discussing economics with people, and one day somebody said to me, how long have you been into MMT? And I was like, what's MMT? I don't even know what that is. I said, modern monetary theory. I said, okay, I still don't know what that is. And bear in mind, I've known Randy and Stephanie for years. All right, way back when we got our PhDs, and I never seen them call themselves that. I guess they were. I just didn't notice. But I was like, oh, okay, well, that's just logic. That's just post-Keynesian economics. That's just real world. That's how it actually works. So that's, I don't know where you want me to go from there, but that's kind of how I ended up here. Actually, let me give you one more thing, Stephen.
Sure.
I was given a paper at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, which is where, Randy and Stephanie were. And I was waiting for someone to come pick me up to drive me back to the airport. And on the radio, I think it was Paul Ryan or somebody was going on about needing to balance the budget. And as I'm standing there waiting for the cab, I got angrier and angrier. And I got to the Kansas City airport and I started writing. And I said, I have got to explain this to the average person once and for all so that they can understand that we don't need to balance the budget and so forth. And I spent a week or more on writing this up. I had my wife read it for me so that I could have how does the educated layperson understand this? And she helped me edit it. Sent it off, and long story short, they took it at Forbes, of all places. And then Forbes ended up offering me a blog there. So it was on the basis of an article I wrote because I was angry after my talk at UMKC that I ended up with a Forbes blog. So
that is absolutely fantastic. And you know what's ironic? I post when I post your article, just to show you how fuddy-duddy our quote-unquote movement is. You know, I've got people. I've got a guy who is the biggest Bernie supporter of all, who writes for the God-awful Observer, which is Jared Kushner's paper, and they just sit there and say, "Why are you sending this?" Blah blah blah. And I'm like, dude, this guy is tight. He's good, and he's on my team. You know, so that's why. You know, and then it's like, and then I post yours and like, oh, of course Forbes says taxes, blah, blah, blah. Of course Forbes. I'm like, guys, stop the contempt prior to investigation. Stop the appeals to authority, blah, blah, blah. So, all right. So
it's funny you should say that because something that worries me is that a lot of the MMT people I see on Facebook do the same thing though. They can be very condescending to people that don't understand it. And that to me is absolutely the wrong way to do this. And so that you have to treat people with respect. And you know, there was a time when all of us believed that you had to balance the budget too. So you have to treat people as if they just haven't heard it. And you know, one thing I learned from my wife, she's had to watch me give this talk on the debt and the deficit probably a dozen times. She said that it took till about the third time for her to finally say, oh yeah, now I see where you're getting. And I think you're challenging so many accepted wisdoms all at once that I think of it this way. I'm trying to get you to come over to one thing at a time, and then we'll see, you know, successive attempts to see how much, you know, goes over. But yeah, the whole thing with the appeal to authority and that, some of our people need to back off a little bit and be more generous and polite, and less about, you know, we're out to convince people, not to attack people.
So let me address that, because one of the things that I've found, and this is just in my world, right? You've got, just like you got tiers of money, you've got tiers of people, and within the movement, if you will, you've got a competing gold bug logic that really, really, really is adamant, and they are fetishizers of the gold. And then you've got the next piece of people, which are adamantly like, we can't pass this debt on to our kids, damn it, and they just hold tight, right? And to me, what I have found, this is my perspective, right? People are dying. That's the thing. People are literally getting sick. They're not getting health care. We're going to war over crazy stuff that maybe doesn't really need to be there. A lot of bigotry exists in this country as a direct result of the bad economics that we push forward. So the pain and suffering is so severe that unfortunately the radical departure from what you think is right to what really is right requires a shock doctrine almost. And so the goal is not to be rude or disrespectful from my perspective. The goal has been, you see economics as watching paint dry. You see economics as watching grass grow. I'm here to wake you up. I want you to wake up because I want to save the world for my children. Otherwise, people wouldn't even tune in. And that's the sad thing, is that they won't even tune in when you're kind and sweet and gentle half.
Well, I don't entirely, because I think that what you need to make sure is that your first contact doesn't end up being your last contact.
That's true too.
You know, that's what's important to me in this whole thing. And you know, and people live as microeconomic beings, and they have a tendency to interpret all problems on a microeconomic scale. But this is a macro problem, and that's the way I kind of try to explain it. And you know, and I'm sorry, I'm going to jump into my debt and deficit talk if you want.
Yes, but I want, before you do that, though, I want to say something really positive about your approach. So for the folks that have been watching us, you've seen people that have been traditional MMTers largely. You've seen an awful lot of discussion about a very set box of tools, if you will. John has a different perspective. It leads to the same stuff. This is the thing. It's all one giant truth. But the way he does this is why I'm so excited about tonight, because it's going to give you a different perspective, hopefully some new tools to take out amongst the world of activists and help activate. So John, go ahead, right into your thing. There you go.
All right. Well, where I start off with, you know, and again, you're trying to get your audience to follow along, and you want them to keep saying, oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah, you know, and one piece at a time. And here, let me grab mine. bring off my entire PowerPoint, but I'm not going to make you watch the whole thing. All right. Let's say we've got, all right, those are 10 willing workers. These are 10 people. This is the entire macroeconomy, let's say, all right? So these are all 10 people in the macroeconomy. And let's say, however, that we can meet demand for all 10 by just employing 7, all right? The productivity is such that in order to saturate the demand for whatever these, people want to buy, it only takes 7 people. I mean, think about agriculture. At one point it was, 90% of the population, down to 7%, I think it's less than 2% now. I mean, so as far as you can saturate the demand, you can make enough goods and services for everybody with 7 people. Now, if I'm the entrepreneur hiring these people, then I'm not going to hire these last 3 people. They're going to make stuff I can't sell. I can only sell to 10 people. In fact, I'm not even going to hire all 7 because these last 3 here, they can't buy anything. They don't have any money, right? So I'm only going to be able to produce or to hire enough people as I can sell. So let's say that this brings us to an equilibrium. We can get out some math. So let's not do that. Let's say that as the entrepreneur, if I hire 6 people, then I can sell enough for 6 people. Now, we've got 4 people here for whom we have the productive capacity and the resources to produce goods and services. All right, so this exists. We have the productive capacity. We can, as right now, we have the productive capacity to meet the demands of many more people than we are. In the Great Depression, was the economy less productive than it had been in the 20s? Absolutely not. It was more productive. The 20s was a period of mass investment and capital capital investment. And so we should have had, the 30s should have been the greatest period in American history. Had this massive buildup in productivity, and in fact, it was the opposite. And again, you really want to lay on this. We had the capacity. There was nothing different in the 30s about our ability to produce goods and services than there was back in the 20s. If anything, we were more able to produce goods and services. Thankfully, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. Yeah. We tried before that, and what I use for my example is, okay, let's say we have the government come in and we'll make these 3 individuals, I think I've got here a police officer, a Marine, and a teacher. And we'll pay them with public money. And we'll worry about where we get the money later, right? For now, we're just going to pay them with public money. These are all going to be public services. Now, we still got this 4th person unemployed. But then here's the thing, that once we've given these 3 people a stack of money, and obviously we're going to have to decide, how much that should be and how much would be fair, which would give a job to us economists, because we could be the ones deciding that. Then once they're working and they're going to the store and the soldier is going to Walmart and buying things off the shelf, I got to hire more workers. When the teacher is going to the teacher store, and we spend a lot of time there because my wife's a teacher, then they will end up having to hire more workers. So in order to get us back to full employment, all we have to do is create jobs for these 3 people. Now, this is a political problem. It's not an economic problem. It's a political problem. What do we think is fair for those 3 people to do? Do we want those 3 people to walk along, do the Ministry of Silly Walks or something like that to earn income? Or do we think public parks or whatever? But the bottom line is we have the productive capacity. So that's the first thing you have to establish, is it's not like the U.S. doesn't have the ability to produce goods and services on the same level we did in 2004. We're around 4% unemployment. Well, what's different now? Nothing in terms of our productive capacity. We could get back there. We could get back there with decent jobs. What was different in 1930s over the 1920s in terms of productive capacity? Nothing except more so. So we had terrible political problems. As the government is spending in deficit with the New Deal program, then people are saying, oh, no, we've become socialist. We've got cartoons comparing FDR to Marx and Lenin. And of course, they tried to balance the budget around 37, I think it was, and unemployment went from 25 to 14 back to 19, and it basically took until Pearl Harbor for it to come back down again. So, again, let's just say we put up a pile of money, as we did during World War II, when we had 1.9% unemployment. Right? So we got 1.9% unemployment, and as a consequence, we actually had, well, I'll come back to that later. All right, so, Stephen, anything before I go on?
No. I'm loving it. I'm just checking our comments out and I'm putting them up there.
By the way, Aaron's wrong. Civility is not overrated. You turn people off.
Well, there's a lot more. You got a bunch of CCCs people that were part of different things throughout FDR. There's a whole bunch of really great stuff. After the thing, you'll have to read through. These are wonderful.
Right. Yeah, no, so when I'm giving the talk, the very first place I go is unemployment, A, and B, the fact that the productive capacity is there. That is the problem. If it were, we're screwed. It doesn't matter whether we can spend a deficit or not. We're screwed. If we don't have the ability to produce enough goods and services, then everything else is irrelevant. But if we do, now we got options. All right, so up to this point of the talk, I'm trying to tell people that the government can sort of solve this problem by spending in deficit and creating jobs for these three people. But then you say, but that feels wrong. I mean, aren't surpluses a good thing? And they sure are. And this is a very easy point to make. If I'm the federal government and you are the public, if I spend more than I earn, what have you done? You've earned more than you spent. I got to tell you, I was on a conservative radio station one time, and I said that, and I was in the midst of making a different point. Like, wait, come back. I said, say that again. And the logic is so inescapable that they're like, well, yeah, that makes sense. That if the government taxes more than it earns, for example, we have drained income. Also toss in an attack on Clinton. They like that too. But if they tax more than they spend, then we're draining income from the private sector. So again, you want to make the point that now I'm starting to start to get into the points that you make with the MMT stuff. First, again, establish the unemployment and the productive capacity, absolutely key, and we can create these jobs. And then, but aren't surpluses good? Yeah, they are, and that's what we're getting. We're the ones getting the surplus, all right? And then you say, and the last time I gave the talk was in Lubbock, and so I centered the last part around Buddy Holly, of course. Where's Buddy here? Okay, here we go. Got Buddy Holly here. Buddy, can you please tell the U.S. be forced to default on the debt? And Buddy says, that'll be the day. Sadly, my students do not know anybody Holly songs, so that didn't go over as well with them. But it is absolutely impossible for the United States to default on the debt. And this, ironically, should be the least controversial thing you say. But it is the one that causes the most trouble. Everything up to now, people will buy into. And in fact, there's a lot of I think, correct, but at least arguable theory behind it. Up until this point. At this point, no, this is a fact. I mean, and I don't say fact easily, right? Because as a scientist type person, you want to be very careful about that. But no, it's true. And as soon as you hear somebody say that the U.S. can default on the debt, then either they are simply ignorant, which I believe is the case 99% of the time maybe, or they have an ulterior motive. And at that point, and I'm not going to make you look at all this stuff, but now I've got my list of quotes from, various Alan Greenspan, the U.S. can pay any debt it has. I've got Mike Norman, you probably know him. I've got the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, one of my favorites, where they say it's impossible.
So I want to hit on this point Zohar has put. Why not goods? You rather import people not growing food, building furniture? People don't understand the trade-off of being a net importer versus a net exporter. It's not a zero-sum game here. I mean, just take a second, because this is a prevailing stumbling block for a lot of people, and it's a shame because we've been given this wonderful gift, and it doesn't have to be a toxic thing. We just have to do different things when we're in import mode versus export mode.
Right, and I'm trying. Yeah, I'm in my daughter's bedroom, which is why it's clean, because she's out of college. And I'm seeing she has some money laying around, because the glorious, glorious thing about being the world reserve currency is that, here, I'll pretend this is a dollar. People in other countries accept these for these. And this is what they want, because they know that this is the safest asset on the planet, and they are willingly trading these for these. And so the day that the U.S. doesn't become, the dollar doesn't become the reserve currency, and I don't know if that's what you're getting at or not, Steve, that's a problem. But otherwise, we can import until the cows come home, and it's not really a direct issue. I don't know.
Let me touch on that for a second. And this is kind of my perspective on this, and maybe you can set me straight. So, Mosler would say that, hey, they're, to your point, hey, man, they're willing to take paper for goods and services. What's the problem? The problem is that in order for us, with our money leaving out of the country as a leakage, without us deficit spending into the economy, then it really is a problem. We don't have work. So the point is that this is what happens in Greece. They lost their monetary sovereignty, right? So by being a net importer, what we allow ourselves to do is, instead of twisting the ties on the Tootsie Pop, we're able to invest on infrastructure. We're able to invest on education, medical, you name it, real public purpose type stuff, as opposed to, hey, can we maybe make the next bunny foo-foo doll? I mean, it just seems to me like a win-win-win.
Well, and there's another point in there, too, that you made in the process of it, and that was, when I give this talk, I only ever talk about, as I said a minute ago, if I'm the federal government and I have a deficit, you must therefore logically have a surplus. But there's actually three groups, right? And it's, the domestic private sector, it's the federal government, and then it's the rest of the world. So the three have to add to zero. The two don't have to add to zero. The three do. And if I feel like the audience is getting it, then I'll go to this. Otherwise, I'll leave it alone. But the thing is, we already have a deficit to the rest of the world. All right. So the U.S. already, the private sector is already spending more than it earns from the rest of the world. Geez, we have to have the government spend in surplus just for us to break even. I don't know if that's what one of the points you were getting at as well or not.
That's exactly it.
Yes. Yeah. And that we have to offset, which is fine. It's easily done. It's not a problem. But the other thing is that people bring up at this point, and I usually start off with, how much of U.S. debt do you think China owns? And I'm proud to say that our econ majors do much better than the general public does. But it ends up being, the very last category, 0 to 10%. And then you add in, and who gives a crap? Because what are they going to do with it? I mean, first of all, if they decided to cash it all in, okay, we'll type in the numbers on the computer and we'll send you that money. Yeah, that's no problem at all. But here's the other thing. They are going to cause, unless they buy our financial assets, their currency appreciates. And it's hard to show without a graph. But if China is exporting more than it's importing, then Chinese currency is more popular than everyone else's currency, and their currency will appreciate, unless they somehow offset that, which is why they accumulate financial assets. Otherwise, your currency appreciates, you don't have your trade surplus anymore. Not quite as simple as that, but that's yet another factor where we don't really care. And what else are they going to end up? What are they going to do with the money? I mean, they need us. They need us much more than we need them, because their domestic macroeconomy is very weak, and they need this source of demand for their goods and services. I think it's been attributed to Ross Perot, but who knows who said it? If I owe the bank $100, it's my problem. If I owe the bank $1 million, it's their problem. Right? So, it is. Yeah.
So one of the guys that follows us tried to make the point that if China owns all these treasury bonds and they can buy out our major companies and take over America and so on and so forth. Yeah. And my thoughts were, first of all, why would they want to do that? But second of all, we have mechanisms in place to prevent anything that would be even remotely like a hostile takeover of sorts. I mean, can you talk just a little bit to allay some of those fears?
You want me to add to some of them? Because I can do that too. Because apparently I don't know enough about that to speak intelligently on it.
Sure.
I do know this, that the Chinese will keep an eye on where we are importing various parts of military weaponry, the weapon systems, and then they'll buy the company. They'll wait for a while and so now they got the technology. They don't have to go through and develop it themselves. And they've also kind of got us over a barrel. And in fact, the U.S. has only recently started looking into that as an issue. Now, obviously, I have tanks all over the house. My first love is military history, and then economics, and then my family, of course, coming in third. But and so the military history stuff I find fascinating. So there's a negative story, but again, having brought that up, I'd rather they own the Treasury bills than Walmart. I don't really know what the implications of that would be. Because here's the thing: we always told the rest of the world that, oh, it's no problem that we own all your companies. No, it's all right that Exxon is pumping all the oil out of your ground there, and that we own the rights to that. Actually, it was. Now, I don't see that as a realistic problem. Certainly, it's worth sort of mentioning, but that's not on the table right now, and that to me isn't what I'm worried about. Nor does that in any way change the issue of we can spend in deficit forever. In fact, we have to. We absolutely have to in order to create a surplus for the private sector.
I think one of the things that would be worthwhile someday is if we could just publish a book and make it fun, right? Make it fun of ridiculous fears and the answers to them. Like seriously, make it fun, because econ is, for me, I just wake up in the morning eager to talk about it, and I go to bed at night thinking about it. I can't stop thinking about it. But for the average person, this really isn't just this compelling thing. They're doing it because they're afraid. So wouldn't it be fun to create a book that would just delay
what's the name of Warren Mosler's book?
7 Deadly Innocent Frauds.
Yeah. That's a fun book to read. It's also depressing because there's a section in there where he says, I think it was in there, where he says he was sitting next to Al Gore at a dinner.
Yes.
He explained the whole thing to him, and Al Gore nodded politely, and then at the end said, I can't say that out loud. There's no way I can say that. So there's another depressing video with Jamie Galbraith where he's being interviewed, and the interviewer says at the end, how many people in Congress do you think really understand this? And he was kind of taken aback, and he's like, really understand it? I said, yeah. I said, I don't know, maybe one or two. There's a lot more than one or two people in Congress, as it turns out. So that's very frightening. So
yes, it is. Yeah. Okay, so talk to me. Let's get that convo going, because the GOP is hell-bent on creating this constitutional convention to bring about a balanced budget amendment. And unfortunately for all of us, there are some unwitting Democrats and there are some unwitting progressives who would go along with the death knell of our nation all in one breath. Talk to me about that in less acerbic terms. I would choose to use.
Well, the great irony, of course, is, as we all know, that the party of deficit spending is the Republican Party. That they have, which is absolutely fine. Go ahead. Reagan tripled the national debt, I think, at least in nominal terms, and the economy recovered. Gee, who would have thought? And so, traditionally, it's been them. And so I think, and I'm sure all of us have seen quotes from Dick Cheney and so forth. Deficits don't matter, and you wonder to yourself, maybe they know. Maybe they really know, but it is a vehicle for them to get rid of the programs they don't want. Social Security, public education, because the only way they're really going to balance the budget, which they never will be able to, because as soon as you start cutting programs, what you're going to do is lower income. And then that's going to lower tax revenues, and it's going to spiral on down. So it's actually not going to be possible. But nevertheless, what they're really out to do, they're not going to raise taxes. What are they going to do? They're going to cut programs. And so what the balanced budget amendment is really about is, and yes, we're not cynical, but this is the most cynical perspective on it. The balanced budget amendment is really about getting rid of the social programs that they don't like, because way down deep, they think somebody's screwing them over. I didn't believe this for years. I've always been leaning towards the idea that, more conservative people, they just have an honest to goodness different outlook on the world. Their theory of the way the world works is different. And my wife would always say, no, they're greedy. And I'm thinking she's right. There's a lot to that. And greed manifesting itself this way, that, I have all this money, but somebody's screwing me over. Somebody's taking some from me somewhere, and I'm going to put an end to it. And all these lazy people out there who, I hear this from some of my relatives, that are taking advantage of the system. Anyway, sorry, to get started with something else. Taking advantage of the system, can't pass drug tests and so forth. So there's that group. That's the most cynical view. Otherwise, you have these people who, honest to God, believe, which they haven't been taught otherwise. They certainly haven't been taught otherwise by the economics discipline.
right.
that the budget needs to be balanced. I was contacted year before last by a group of students on campus who were part of a group called, I can't remember the name now, but it's something that's sponsored by the Pete Peterson balanced budget stuff.
Oh, yes. Joe Firestone and I just talked about that, by the way. Yes, keep going.
Yeah, they contacted me and asked if I would help them put together a series of videos. So I scripted, and they're on YouTube somewhere. I scripted and did all these videos on the debt and the deficit. And boy, was what I said different than what they expected. But they were, they were nice kids, and they thought at the beginning of it that they needed to help balance the budget. And so, by the way, some of my students, there was a student group on campus that was holding up one of those debt clocks. And my students came by and corrected me. So I was like, hey, you're showing how much private sector assets are going up. That's fantastic.
Oh, yes. Hit that for just quick one sentence. Yeah. The debt. Describe that real quick before you go past. It's just the national assets. It's not, hit it.
They need a different name. It shouldn't be called debt. Well, it shouldn't be called debt. Going, man, if I can't do it in one sentence. If I can go back to the unemployment issue, you know what? I meant to say this, and here's my summary. In periods of high unemployment, only the federal government has the ability and obligation to address the problem. Furthermore, they are not borrowing to buy something they cannot otherwise afford. Rather, they are pumping funds into the private sector in order to make profitable production of goods and services we could already make. It's stuff we can already do. We already have the ability to do these things. We already have the ability to create these jobs, but the profit motive can only do so much, and not enough is the answer. But I'm sorry, I didn't get to your answer at all. The government's debt is our asset. It's really that simple. Pavlina Chernova has some really nice quotes on that. I quote her in my talk. And she does lots of work on the job guarantee. I don't know if you're familiar with her stuff or not.
Very much. We've had her on once, and then she's coming on March 2nd. She'll be on to talk about ironically, she'll be talking about the pay gap for women and the old family wage versus the pin wage. Right, and I was like, wow, this is new for me. Yeah. So I'm sure.
It was really neat because it was some years ago when I was presenting a paper and Pavlina was passing through the room, and I was like, what you working on right now? And she told me, this work on how the deficit spending that we do, that's another issue. How we do deficit spending right now tends not to help those who most need the help. It tends to go to profits and into the wages of those, not completely. But I said, oh, that's really interesting. And so I emailed her sometime later, asked her how the work was going, and it's now proceeded to the point where she's had her charts shown on the floor of Congress. She, developed a theoretical model, which I go over in my intermediate macro class, and then, did the empirical research and really, really important stuff. That, first we have to establish that the government can and must spend in deficit in order to activate these private sector resources that are otherwise idle. And then secondly, we have to say, how should we do that? But anyway, I'm getting into an issue that separate issue.
It is a separate issue, but it's all good. All right, so let's get back to the balanced budgets, though, in terms of what is at stake and what the essence of the balanced budget is. I mean, your paper you wrote, I think it was, I'm going to say this wrong because I don't have it in front of me. Yeah. But I think you said 5 reasons why a balanced budget is bad or something like that. Is
First of all, I apologize for my clickbait title. It turns out that actually works. I fought against it for so long. I would not do it. And finally, I was like, my God, the ones that people read are the ones that say 7 reasons why. And so I gave in. So I apologize for the 5 reasons why. But no, I mean, it's really very simple that when they lay off a worker, let's lay off a Marine, all right? Now the Marine can't go to the store and buy groceries. And then if they can't buy groceries, then the grocery store has to lay somebody off, and on down the line like that. So is there a strange noise now coming through?
It's my computer. Keep going. Don't worry about it.
Okay, very good.
So sorry.
Cutting spending, when they talk about it in theory, okay, what you going to cut? All right. Who had that job? Right? Who is it that's now on unemployment? And how are the people where they used to shop going to make a living now? Because they don't want to think through those ramifications, but they're there. I was teaching a night class some semesters ago. And first of all, one of my proudest moments as an instructor happened in that class. A student, these were all adults. It was a master's in liberal arts program. And one of the students came up to me after class and said, I've been telling my wife about the stuff I'm learning in here, and debt and deficit, that sort of thing. And she keeps saying, is he a conservative or a liberal? He says, I don't know. I can't tell. I'm doing my job. All right. So, because the way I see it is, you're just laying out the way it works. You draw your own conclusion about how we want to use this information. But I'm just saying, hey, the debt and the deficit are not an issue. If you don't want to, if you do with that information what you will, I guess. I know what I would do, but I'm going to leave that, for me outside the classroom. But at any rate, I know. So it was in that class. I had two, an officer in the Air Force and a sergeant in the Army that was in there. And GDP data had just come out. And I said in class, that growth was down, and why? And they both yelled out government spending. And they said, because it was their friends, all right? And it was their friends who were worried to death. This was one of the sequester things. And it was their friends who were worried to death about losing their job. And this was the impact it actually had. It wasn't just, us deciding even on a micro level. If I decided not to go out to eat as much, there's a restaurant that's not going to do as well. So, but I do have a limit on my income. So, but the government doesn't. Anyway, I wandered off there in several directions. I'll let you catch us back up now.
No, man. Every time you're wandering right where everybody wishes you were wandering. And see, that's the thing about this stuff, right? You try and stay focused on something, and you realize that there's this little thing over here and this little thing over here. Everybody's got these questions, and you're so used to answering them because that's just what happens in the normal course of explaining this stuff. So this is great because the people that are watching are largely not, doctoral students in your econ class,
which is actually a huge advantage.
I agree. Yes.
But, and it's funny you should say that about all the different directions you have to go, because that article that I wrote angrily at Kansas City Airport, it was too long. It was way too long for your normal op-ed. And I knew it. And when I gave it to TCU, my university, they of course have a PR office, and they sent it out. And they said, I told them, I said, I know it's too long. But if I don't end up explaining all these things, I'm going to leave a huge question open. And finally, I was just about to cut it short when nobody would take it. And finally, Forbes took it. And it was the, what's his name? Brett. I can't think of his last name. But he's the editor of the leadership section. He was a music major at Harvard. That's his background. But he was worried to death that the U.S. would do the same thing they did in 1987. In 1937, and that was try to balance the budget and bring us right back down again. And so I have to really thank Forbes and him for actually accepting it in the full length. And this is not part of the blog, actually; it's a separate article. But where I went through, I said, look, if I don't make it this long, I've left some key question open. Obviously, there's still going to be questions, but what you say is exactly right. As soon as you go one direction, all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, what about this? What about this?
And that's, see, for me, my problem is this. When I come out and I talk about this stuff, I am not an economist, though I have an MBA, and I've obviously been trained classically, and I've learned all the basic stuff that you had to learn to get through. I learned Hayek and the gang, and then I, of course, learned Milton Friedman and Keynes and the Wealth of Nations and all the other things that you're forced to suck through, and read up. And I literally was so entrenched in Bretton Woods and beyond prior to logic, that when 1971 hit, here's the thing. I didn't understand this, and it even becomes more clear now that fiat currency, sovereign fiat currency, has been around for an awful long time. This is really not new. The king would mint his coin. The king would have to levy a tax to get you to do things that the state wanted you to do. This is the state money talk, right? But this is stuff that, as you go through that, you don't realize that the primary driver of currency to begin with, when it's in a state situation, is to, in fact, drive the currency by levying a tax. It's not because the king who prints the gold needs your gold back. It's because if you don't use his gold, there'll be this currency war and there'll be all kinds of crazy stuff going on, every which way. There's no way to get you off your lap or your couch.
Yeah.
Otherwise.
Speaking of war, when Patton, after Operation Torch, when the Americans and the British invaded North Africa, the western part of North Africa, and Patton is in command at Casablanca, and Patton is trying to get some local labor to help unload trucks, and so he, promises them some army script, the army money. Like, what do we care about this? We don't want to use it. So he said, okay, I'll open the base store to you. Oh my God, they have more workers than they knew what to do with. Because suddenly, it's not quite the same thing as tax, but you've said, okay, you can have some really cool stuff, but the only thing you can use to pay for it is what I'm handing out right now, which is, another way, it's sort of a carrot rather than a stick of, okay, you have to pay taxes. It's the only thing you can use to pay taxes. But yeah, Payam is right. I was thinking about that, about the, actually a lot of money was created just from credit. I just got done writing this morning a whole bunch on how most money is really an IOU created by the private sector. But fascinating, but I'll leave it alone.
All right, so let's take a step back for a second. One of the other things that you had talked about, literally my favorite article that you've ever written, is the fact that money growth does not cause inflation. And for many people, whenever we say this to them, they're thinking gold standard. They're thinking it's tied to a commodity. There's a set pool of gold. If we slice the pie any thinner, you're devaluing my currency, or blah, blah. Old gold standard logic. I mean, it's pertinent if you're on a gold standard, but we're not on a gold standard. So,
and it's what I learned in graduate school and undergrad too. And yes, that's one of my favorite pieces, actually. That was one of those things I was really, really wanted to write. And I got into I shouldn't say that. I got into a very respectful exchange with a monetarist at the end of it. But let me tell you about that after I explain why money growth can't cause inflation. Okay, let's see. Do I use equations or not? All right. No, screw it. All right. Here's Friedman's argument in his classic article that I had to read in grad school about what causes inflation. And I look back at it now and think, why the hell did somebody publish this? But anyway, just say now I'm not being charitable, like I said you should be at first. Of course, he's dead. He's saying that everyone on this island has a certain amount of cash they would like to hold for transactions purposes or whatever. And it's sort of a ratio of how much income they have right now. And they have as much as they want. Then a helicopter flies over and drops out some money. Suddenly people have more cash than they want. So they rid themselves, and here's a term used by, who's that New York? Paul Krugman, I've seen him use this term. People then rid themselves of their excess money balances, more cash than they wanted. And so they go to the store to spend this money, only Friedman's Island was already at full employment. So when they go to the store to spend the money, there's nothing else there. All they do is bid up prices, and therefore, when you print money, it costs inflation. Okay, so that's the basic story. All right, here's what's wrong with it. First of all, when, for example, after the financial crisis, we weren't at full employment, right? So, if you went to the store to buy stuff, you would have created jobs. You wouldn't have caused inflation. You would have created jobs. So there's the first problem. Second problem has to do with something called velocity, which I won't even mess with. Another problem is, by the way, the article is fundamentally flawed. Friedman is not giving an example of monetary policy. He's actually giving an example of fiscal policy. He increased people's incomes. He did not change the form of the assets they had, because that would be monetary policy. If you have some treasury bills and I buy them from you, that was monetary. If you're a bank, I buy them, that's monetary policy. You don't have any more wealth than you did before, but it's in a different form. So Friedman actually just had fiscal policy. So it's as I say, it's a bad argument to start with. But here's the one that really kills your monetarist types. And that is that anyway, it's impossible to give somebody more money than they want. And that really bothers them. Because and to jump ahead a little bit, that's what this person that I had the exchange with on Forbes said, well, it must be. But here's why you can't give someone more money than they want. All right. The tools, now in the paper, he drops out of the helicopter. Let's say I want to have, give you more cash. And so I want to buy one of your diplomas off the wall, but you don't want to sell it. There's nothing I can do. I mean, you have to be willing to sell it. There is no way, if the money's here at the Fed, and anyway, that's not the way the money supply works anyway, but if there's money here at the Fed, to a bank. But if the bank doesn't want the loan, they're not going to take it. And if they, they would only want the loan if they thought they could turn around and loan it to somebody else. So as a consequence, it is impossible to make someone take more money than they want. That the tools we actually have don't allow us to do that. So this monetarist, and I looked him up afterwards. It was very nice. It was a very pleasant exchange. But apparently he's like head of some what do you call it? A company that advises people on stuff.
Consulting company?
Yeah, thank you. Consulting company. Some big consulting company that helps third world countries develop, and they tell us why they haven't. But anyway, he said that, well, it must be possible to give people more cash than they want, otherwise you wouldn't have had the great inflation of the 70s. And I said, okay, then please tell me what the tool is that the Fed has that can force me to take more money. And he said, well, it's like a hot potato. If we pass a hot potato. I said, no, I don't want an analogy. I want a tool. He said, well, it's like if you put too many logs in the fireplace. I swear this is true. If you put too many logs in the fireplace. He said, no, I don't want an analogy. I just want the tool. So, well, it's like if you plant too many trees in an orchard. I said, no, I don't want an analogy. I just want the actual tools the Fed has that allows them to increase the money supply, above what people want. And his response was, well, I guess we must agree to disagree. And he didn't know. Because, this gets to a much more fundamental philosophical question, actually. And that is, what is respected as evidence in different schools of thought? In the Post-Keynesian school of thought, you better have an explanation that locks into real-world institutions. Otherwise, it's not a good explanation. In monetarism, it's okay if it doesn't have any connection whatsoever to the real world, as long as it, quote unquote, predicts well. Only they never actually check that part of it anyway, besides which it's really sort of impossible to check. So you can make up any story you want, and it's legitimate if we all think it sounds clever. But man, can't get away with that in the post-Keynesian stuff. I just finished writing an article on international trade and exchange rates. I spent so many hours poring over these documents on how firms finance, actually, in real life, finance trade. And it was really hard. It was a lot harder than if I'd written something neoclassical and said, let's just assume they have some money. So anyway, that was the core part of that argument. And by the way, I have given that talk in front of bankers, and then gone on to show how banks create money out of thin air, and they're all nodding their head, yeah, they know. They just make it up. It's not, that no, you can't force money into people's hands, but when they do want it, we can create it at will. But I'll stop there to see where you want me to go.
Okay, well, so let's go backwards for a second to the balanced budget, because apparently there was a couple people that didn't feel like we got all the way through there.
Yeah.
So, in the late 90s, obviously, the Clintons had done the personal responsibility act of reforming welfare, and
right.
they had the dot-com bubble, which is a once in a generation kind of technology, once in a lifetime, change. You had all these things going on at once, and then all of a sudden you had the crash. We're gonna be smart with our money. We're gonna cut back on spending. We're gonna this, that, and the other, and all of a sudden W gets elected. And he has a recession, and people are blaming W. You don't have to like W. He certainly was a warmonger and whatever.
I like him a lot now, actually, but anyway.
Well, the point I'm making is that the people, for whatever reason, you don't have to. It's not a partisan issue. Economics is just truth, right?
Yeah.
So the fact is that the Democrats and Sidney Wheel and signing away Glass-Steagall and all the other fun things that they did kind of set the stage for a whole lot of calamity that Democrats have conveniently tried to pile onto the Republicans. Republicans, whatever you feel about them, good, bad, and different, they really did not deserve the credit for a lot of the stuff that happened here. This was really the machinations of neoliberalism coming to roost through the new Democrat.
Right, yeah. I mean, it started up, I think, by Reagan, and then Clinton helps him out by following the same route, which, by the way, pretty much gets us uninvited from the local Democrat parties here when you bring that up. But anyway. No, and we were talking about this before we came on the air. The whole thing with the balanced budget at the end of the 90s. First of all, you point out, look, first thing, and audiences get this right away. Did the balanced budget come before the expansion or after the expansion? At the beginning or at the end? Like at the end. So that's right. So, it wasn't like a balanced budget suddenly caused tremendous growth. No. Tremendous growth put us in a position to where they could make these hard decisions, which they shouldn't have made, but I'll get to that in just a minute. Because during this long expansion, and as you say, a once-in-a-lifetime thing, very much like the 20s with the automobile industry, same thing. We have this foundational industry that is creating this constant level of demand much longer than it was normally. But at the end of the 90s, tax revenues are going up and up and up. And then at the same time, we've got welfare and unemployment expenditures going down and down and down. Well, at some point, I don't know if I can do this right, they cross, all right? So you've got revenues, expenditures. And I don't think they crossed, they got close, but then they thought, well, I know what we should do. Now we should balance the budget. Now, I don't personally blame the whole thing on the recession on that, because there is an internal dynamic as well. And this is my post-Keynesian side. Keynes's chapter 22 is my absolute favorite chapter, where he describes how the private sector and of course, you're trying to strip away all the things that could be blamed for a recession, but the private sector by itself creates recessions. So it was that inevitably, when you build all this infrastructure, you get done. You make no money by building a restaurant. You make money by opening the doors. So at some point you stop investing, and that also leads to a downturn. But on top of that, we certainly could have offset that with the government spending. And what I really like to point out is the change in private sector debt levels. Now that's an excellent example to show right there how, well, look, all of a sudden the government was taxing more than it was spending, and look what happened to private sector debt. So that's what I would say about that.
Okay, so at the end of the day, a balanced budget eliminates policy space. It eliminates public sector deficits are private sector surpluses, and vice versa. So,
and if the private sector, let me add this: if the private sector could by itself employ everyone who is willing to work, then screw it, balance the budget. The Republicans are right. What we need to do is to remove the regulations and free up the private sector so they can hire everybody. But they won't, because and this takes a little bit more to explain, but the profit motive is insufficient to hire everyone who's willing to work. If we could reduce our level of productivity, we could, we can hire everybody. If we get rid of the self-checkout lanes at Walmart, if we get rid of the little thing when you walk into Panera and you punch in your order and so forth, why did they do that? And by the way, Fidel and Payam, you need to read chapter 22. They're pointing out which chapters are their favorites. So there's my copy that's been beat to death. Anyway, so if the private sector could take care of it, who cares? Then I got nothing against the market. I have absolutely nothing against markets. And if they're going to take off and take care, that's wonderful. But they don't. They are insufficient, and they've been insufficient since at least the 1920s, if not before that. And so we have to, and you're right, it takes away an absolutely vital policy tool, and it takes away our ability to create full employment, and it takes away our ability. Poor neighbors are bad neighbors, and so we need to solve that issue.
Absolutely. So, we're coming up to the 9 o'clock hour, and I want to be fair with you, because normally our shows just go till people are done talking, because there's so much good information. But I do want to be respectful. We are up against the hour here, and what I wanted to ask you before we go any further, as someone who considers himself to be a post-Keynesian, as opposed to just a strictly MMT person. I try and explain to folks this, and I want to get your, concurrence or disagreement. MMT describes currency wherever it is. It doesn't matter where it is. It just describes currency. It describes the situation. It doesn't tell you how to spend it. That's what Keynes does, or that describes the causal effects of different things. MMT describes the way currency operates. And once you get into policy prescriptions, they can be as varied as anything you want. From the monetarists, if they actually came to understand the underlying currency truths, they would have their own policies too, just like Keynes would, and just like the Austrians could. If anybody could have their own belief system and how to utilize this stuff. But the underlying currency truths, whether it be in Greece, whether it be in the European Union and the Eurozone, whether it be the BRICS, whether it be here, there, it describes currency. That's really all it's doing. It's not prescribing, although the job guarantee is kind of part and parcel with that. The
and
school
it does kind of lead you to some places.
Yes.
I would say this, that every academic that I know that calls themselves MMT also calls themselves Post-Keynesian. So, I mean, it's not really, it's more of an emphasis. Now, there are some Post-Keynesians who don't like it. But, there are branches within Post-Keynesianism, as you mentioned, Koleski, and, I don't know much about Koleski. I teach at intermediate macro, so I can teach myself more about Koleski. But I see MMT as just part of the whole, I guess, body of thought that is Post-Keynesianism. I would have thought of it as, again, I was totally surprised when somebody said to me, "Oh, you're into MMT." I was like, "Well, what is that?" I figured it was a computer game of some sort because I love computer games. And it's like, "Oh, well, I guess." I mean, and I've, written Randy's and Stephanie's and, stuff for years, Scott Fulwiler. I just didn't know it had a special name.
Right.
Yeah, so to me, I think there probably are some policies directly associated with it just because you tend to see certain people suggesting it. But anyway, but
they're not apparent with it, right? I think for me, the key that draws me to it, because obviously they teach Keynes in school. That's what you get taught. You've got to learn that or you don't get your degree. But the underlying, they really only taught the commodity-based, the devaluation of money. They taught these things that were based on pegging your currency to a commodity. They really didn't get into the understanding of what fiat currency. I mean, they touched on it, but they really stayed in a different place. I mean, it really was very
much better.
Yes.
Keynesian, yes. I mean, I in intermediate macro, I used to have my students read this and then read Sir John Hicks's article, which interprets Keynes, and they were saying he could not have read the same book I read. That none of the stuff that was emphasized in the general theory shows up in that article. So a lot of the stuff that you get in school, and I don't want to trash my fellow economists because, I mean, they're bright, nice people, but boy, the macro stuff is screwed up. And I got to tell you, lots of neoclassical microeconomists feel exactly the same way. Now, I have a colleague at work who's a very good neoclassical microeconomist, and I came up to him last semester. I said, "Oh my God, I get it now. I never understood this before. You think neoclassical, macro is ridiculous." He said, "Oh yeah, no, he's an awesome mathematician." And he said, "They were saying such ridiculous stuff in there. I thought this is a waste of my time." I said, "Well, I feel the same way. We have something in common." So I don't know if I can turn him. I don't know if I can turn him from the dark side or not, but the ones who confuse me are the neoclassical macroeconomists. I'll give you an example. Back when I was department chair, which thank God was a long time ago now, I was observing someone's class, their intermediate macro class, and he talked about something called the golden rule of investment, where if you just the right level of savings to create the right level of investment. And he did a very nice job. And after class, I said to him, but why do firms still invest if the households are saving more? And he said, "I don't know. I never thought about that." And that, from our school of thought, seems like such a fundamental question that I can't imagine. Well, it's because they're already assuming full employment to start with. That's never the issue. And this is why you get crappy macro, is because they're already assuming that we're going to be at full employment. Krugman. I had to go out to lunch with a colleague of mine from the religion department. He said, "Why don't you like Krugman?" I said, "Oh, we'll go out to lunch." But anyway, I don't know if yes, the stuff they teach is really bad, and I used to teach it too. And then slowly over time, you start to realize and you read. And unfortunately, for the average economist, they are not rewarded for learning about how it really works because they have to get published in these journals where.
Thank you. That was going to be how I close. You know what? You bring up a point, and I want to hear your thoughts. The orthodoxy of the day really, really, really is a closed loop. They don't allow heterodox economists. They don't even allow people nibbling around the edges of orthodoxy to have a voice. I mean, I was talking to Fidel, and Fidel said, I don't know if you know this or not, but Stiglitz spoke out there at this big convention after he had written something that was less than complimentary. And there was like the 5 people out of 500 gave a golf clap to the guy. This is a Nobel Peace Prize winning guy. But because he dared even slightly counter the narrative of the orthodoxy, he was literally black sheep right out there. Oh, he's getting old and he's near retirement and don't listen to him kind of thing. How hard is it to survive in this world of academia and trying to buck up through the system to have anything other than just repeating what they say, the Simon Wren Lewises and so forth?
Yeah. I wish for many reasons that Fred Lee was still with us. He just passed away not too long ago, but a great, great guy. And this was really a major area of his research, of his interest. He was a real fireball. He was the kind of person who, when you lose him, you lose 10 other organizations because he was in charge of them all. He was also at UMKC, really nice man. But he talks about when he started the Association for Heterodox Economics in England. And they wanted to present papers, the Post-Keynesians and the Marxists and so forth, wanted to present papers with the Royal Economic Society, which is their version of the mainstream. And they wouldn't let them. And I said, okay, all right, whatever. We'll start our own group. But we'll be in the same city as you, so that way people who are, in the job market, that sort of thing, it'll be convenient for everybody. Do you know what upset them? The Royal Economic Society. This is what Fred said, that hey, you're making us look closed-minded, so you're not allowed to be here anymore. And they apparently threatened cities where they would go from then on. But if you let this Association for Heterodox Economics be here at the same time, we won't do this because they don't want to look like they're closed-minded. It goes back to post-World War II because before that there was some conversation among different schools of thought. And from what I understand, the first problem was that economics had really taken a beating during the Great Depression in terms of its reputation. And then World War II comes along. We've got 1.9% unemployment. Some of the neoclassical stuff is actually relevant. Since most of what they do is, what do we do under full employment? Some of their tools were useful. So we're like, oh, this is really good stuff. But the real killer was the Cold War. Because once the Cold War comes along, if you say anything that isn't, 100% free market, then you're going to have an extremely difficult time maintaining a career. For example, there were 2 University of Texas professors that came up to Dallas apparently to speak at a meeting when someone was going to explain this horribly socialist idea called the 40-hour work week. And the professors were thinking, that's not what it's about. And they were going to come up, it was an open meeting, they wanted to come up and speak. Well, they weren't allowed to speak. They did speak to the press afterwards, and when they got back to Austin, they were fired. So because they were we wanted to clarify the issue with this horribly socialist idea about the 40-hour work week. So from what I understand, 50s and 60s, it was miserable. So then, okay, the Berlin Wall falls. No more Cold War. That's not an issue anymore. But there's momentum built up now. That I explained to my students this way. What if in order to get into heaven, you had to publish in religious journals? And there's Catholic journals, there's Jewish journals, there's Baptist journals, Buddhist journals. But let's say most people are Catholic, all right? So there's really more publications in Catholic journals than anything else. And now let's say we start ranking journals, all right? And let's use what appears to be a very objective standard. Let's go by citations, all right? Well, there's more Catholics. So we're going to end up with more Catholic citations than anything else. We're going to put the Catholic journals at the top. All of a sudden, if I want to go to heaven, even if I'm Jewish, I got to publish in a Catholic journal. And so this just reinforces this strength that the top journals have, where the higher up you are on this ranking, then the more there are professors at these various universities that have to publish there or they won't get tenure. And you should see the lists. There's one school that I teach a class on contending perspectives in economics. We go over different schools of thought. And I showed their tenure document. I can't remember what school it is now, but they have points associated with various journals. Good Lord, I wouldn't have got tenure there. I'm full professor at TCU, and you know, because there's not only could I not get published in those journals, I don't want to. So it is very difficult. It's like this: think outside the box, but not really, because as soon as you start ranking things, since I'm on a rant here, let me also mention what happened at university at Notre Dame. Notre Dame had a fantastic heterodox department. A new dean comes in. They're in the business school. New dean comes in. They're not ranked high enough. Why not? Well, they're not in the right journals. And so, of course, they're not ranked high enough by this standard measure over here. Well, the dean wants a higher ranking. So what the dean does is he splits the department into two parts, economics and political economy. And everyone said, we know what you're doing. You're going to let the political economy part die. No. This is about academic freedom. Remember that the Royal Economic Society was on about that too. I'm actually preserving freedom. They let the political economy department die, just as everyone knew they would. For what? For rankings. And anyway, I am so lucky to have ended up at a school that wasn't like that. Our attitude is, hey, it was a referee journal. That's fantastic. We don't want to tell you. We don't have a graduate program. We're not trying to impress anybody. And yet, ironically, we have faculty in our department. I have a guy that's a new institutionalist. Not one of our people, but nevertheless, outside the mainstream. The Bank of England paid him to come and teach them about their own banking system. And by the way, I learned a lot of the banking stuff from him. There are some people in the new institutional school who still toss in with the full employment thing, but they know a hell of a lot better what they're talking about than the neoclassical. Anyway, I'll stop my rant now.
No, your rant was right on time, John. So with that, what I want to do is I want to thank you for coming on board. I mean, you've joined the ranks of your friends anyway, because we've had them all on here. We literally have. I have never been more blessed in my life. You guys are my heroes. And, we got Joe Firestone every Saturday night. I mean, my God, pinch yourself. And my buddy Ellis was here on Sunday night. And then I talked to Al last night. I talked to Stephen Hale the night before. I'm looking to get the guys out there in Australia. I'm hoping I can get Bill Mitchell. I've had Pavlina. I've interviewed Stephanie once. I need to get him. He is somebody that I have not been able to get a hold of. But, I'm making my rounds with who I know. Right. We've got an in with Mr. Keene.
Oh, I do. In fact, I'm going to London in April to hang out with him, basically.
Please put an ear in him, because I'd love to have him on.
You've got to have him tell you the story of how, because the paper on which his Debt Watch webpage was founded was from 1995, in the middle of the longest expansion in peacetime history, and yet he's warning this is nothing but the lull before the storm way back then. And I won't tell you more, but I was asking him, well, how did you end up starting the page? And it's a very funny story, how he went back and looked at that paper later and thought, oh my God, it's happening. Anyway.
No kidding.
Yeah, I'll talk to you.
Yeah, please do, because I have been wanting to get a hold of him, because the thing that I like about Steve Keene is that his focus on private debt really takes, it speaks, obviously, it speaks to human beings, it speaks to us at a level that we can tangibly relate to. But at the same time, his talks about how to get rid of that debt and stuff, it gets a little nuanced. So I really want to hear him explain it, because I've watched a lot of his videos and I really enjoy what he has to say quite a bit.
Well, he's a great guy. Yeah.
Okay. So, John, I would like to offer you the same offer I ask everybody. Please come back and visit us sometime soon. This is we are trying to educate the public, and when I went to this Economists for Peace thing, I was blown away by the fact that there were 20 people in the audience. 20 people in the audience, and many of them were economists. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, here you've got, I'm like, my hair's standing on end. I got goosebumps. I'm around people that I'm like, and I'm a nerd, I agree. But I'm sitting there amongst, I look at her, I'm like, that's Stephanie Kelton. That's Stephanie right there. And she's like, I hear you.
And I've like I said, I've known Stephanie and Randy and all of them for a long time because it's a small school of thought. I mean, it's not like, oh, I know Stephanie and Randy. There's only a few of us, all right? So, I mean, it's not like it's really distinguishes you to know these people. But nevertheless, I've known them for a long time. And my wife went to high school in Chicago, in Deerfield, actually. And the American Economic Association was in Chicago this year. So she came up with me. We met up with some of her high school friends, all big Bernie Sanders fans. And guess who I made sure they got to meet? They were like, I can't believe I met Stephanie Kelton. So, so I was able to help out. I felt good about it. Finally, my wife saw my worth. So, but yeah, anytime, especially before my daughter moves back in. She's actually in Arizona right now, checking out their PhD program, not in economics, but yeah, while this room is clean, anytime.
Well, just let me know. I will definitely be in touch. This was most informative. And again, we have got our audience really, really, really digs this stuff. And by the time the morning time comes around, this thing will have been seen thousands of times. I'm blown away every time. And then we'll put it on YouTube and we'll put it all over the place and it'll take on a life of its own.
Hey,
so thank you.
All the publicity we can get. That's right. So, well, thank you, Stephen. May the force be with you.
All right, sir. Have a great night. And folks, just while we're at it, just let you know, Sunday Descalia will be coming up here shortly. She's got an interview. In fact, it may be going on as we speak. And then at 10 o'clock tonight, Eastern Standard Time, I'm going to be having the coming out party with Zach Haller. Zach, a Twitter guy that many of you guys know already. Can't wait. Look for you then. I'm out of here. Thank you again to our special guest, John Harvey, who we will indeed have back again. Have a great night, everybody.